In this tutorial, we're going to be looking at real-time lighting in UE4, and we're just going to implement a basic kind of light rig into our white box. So first of all, let's just drop a point light in the scene. We'll drag this over here. So real-time lighting means we're not going to be doing any kind of baking whatsoever. So every light can be animated and kind of moved, and every object can react, will have light reaction to it when it moves too. You can see here it says lighting needs to be rebuilt, and that's basically because I have one object here set to static, so we'll just set him to movable, and you can see that changes so we no longer have that message. So try and make sure initially that all your objects are set to movable, and really you want all your lights on movable as well, so you shouldn't be getting any kind of build messages up here. Right, so the first thing we're going to do is just set up a really basic kind of sky, and to do that we're just going to use the sky sphere here. So we'll drop that into place, and with this what we want to do is just set this to be nighttime. Obviously we're in an observatory here, so when the telescope is actually being used is always at nighttime. So we'll just put the sun height down to -1, and you can see we've got kind of basic sky out there now. Now we want to control some of these colours so it's not so light down here. So if we just tick off colours determined by sun position, and we can start to kind of set this up. And I'm literally just going to lower these right down. So that one's very just off kind of black there. Overall colour as well, we'll bring that down too. We can also control these clouds that we have here. So we have cloud opacity and cloud speed. So maybe we'll bring that down a touch too. And we can obviously set the cloud cover and things here too. And we can also set the star brightness here as well, if you want to just bring those stars out a little bit more. So this isn't massively important at this stage anyway, to be fair. It's just something to kind of use as a backdrop. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is just add a skylight into our scene. Now this is really useful for just generating some kind of ambient light around our scene. Again, we want to set this to movable. So yeah, skylight can work in movable like so. And at the moment this will just be casting a kind of even light everywhere. So what I've done is I've actually brought in an HDR IMAP that we can use. Now I've just downloaded this from HDR Haven here. If you just come to this website, you can see you can download tons of different ones to try out in your scenes. So it's just about picking one that you think is going to mostly kind of best represent what is going on in your scene. So we want to set this to specified cube map, drag this into place, and then obviously we're going to want to control that brightness a bit. So I'm just going to reduce this down like so. Probably even more than that anyway. Okay, so just so we're getting that little bit of kind of extra ambient light around the scene. Right, so with our kind of rough skylight in place, the next thing we're going to do is add two things. We're going to add a post-process and we're going to add an exponential height fog. Now if we just add our post-process in the scene, the reason we want to get this in mainly is so that we can turn off all the auto exposure. So this is when I come out here and come back in, and you'll see the scene kind of changes colour. So changes light level, because auto exposure is on by default. So in our post-process settings, if we just search for exposure, tick on min and max brightness, and just set these both to 0.3. And that way our scene will always stay the kind of same light level that we want. At this point as well, we can come back into our skylight, and you can already see it's making us do some small changes here. So I'm just going to increase the intensity to 0.1. Now something you'll want to do for kind of game scenes and so on is you wouldn't want to have it completely kind of dark, because obviously you want players to be able to navigate around the scene and so on. So It's not a completely kind of realistic interpretation of kind of a night scene with only one light in this, because we don't want it to be completely dark in these areas. Another small thing we might want to tweak is just quickly change our ambient occlusion. We'll be showing you how to do some better ambient occlusion than this anyway, but just for now we're just going to mess around with these kind of basic settings. Obviously changing that exposure has had a bit of an effect on our sky sphere, so maybe we'll just come back to that and just increase these kind of colours up a touch. Probably good to have a little like hint of blue in it as well. And maybe if we go to our stars brightness and just ramp that up even more, like so. Okay, so we have our post-process in place. The next thing we want to do is add our kind of exponential height fog. So come over here, search a fog, we'll add our exponential height fog into the scene. Now the first thing we want to do obviously is tick on volumetric fog, because that's what we're going to use to generate some nice light shafts. And you'll notice the way it's, at the moment, it's kind of taking out all of our sky maps, so we'll mess with those settings in a bit to bring that back. Another way to fix that is to have a much kind of smaller kind of handmade sky dome with your HDR applied to a sphere. And we can also look at that in a later tutorial. So I'm going to add a spotlight into the scene, and that's what's going to kind of represent our moonlight kind of being cast into here. So we could use a directional light, but that's going to cast fog again from kind of all points here, and we don't really want that. So that's why I'm using a spotlight. Also we have we'll get some more kind of long shadows generated by this spotlight, which we wouldn't necessarily get with a directional light. So again, make sure we set this to movable. And the attenuation radius basically refers to how far that kind of spotlight area is there. So I've set that really high just so that we have a nice even spread of light always coming down. The light's not going to fall off while it's in this scene. I'll try putting my intensity up quite a lot. And then what I want to do is make sure that I have volumetric shadow ticks on here. And I'm probably just going to bring this in a touch as well. And just make sure you get the light positioned where you want that light to be cast. So maybe we'll have this casting like a little bit onto there and so on. So we want the light to be quite powerful just to create that nice kind of contrast between light and dark. We're going to light up this kind of desk area. Obviously it depends on what you want your kind of object of focus to be. If it's going to be the telescope, obviously you'd light that up more and so on. We'll also delete out our old point light here because we don't need that anymore. Okay, so with our kind of spotlight roughly positioned, one thing we want to do is just change this volumetric scattering intensity, and what that does is just increase the strength of our volume fog. Now just to show you what the shadow option did there, if I just bring him up here, let's drop a shadow in the scene and we'll just cube in the scene and just grab him there like that. Make sure it's actually on there. So you see how I'm getting this kind of darker area here. So this cube is actually affecting the strength of the volume light. Well, that is what the cast volumetric shadow option does, basically. So if I tick that off, see it's actually affected by other objects. So really useful option. Right, so the next thing we want to do then is select our exponential height fog and just have a mess around with our fall off here, because if I lower that down a bit, we can start to bring back our skylight. Sorry, I can start to bring back our kind of start field. So if we just browse back to our spotlight again, one thing we want to do is just see if we can change the quality of these shadows, because these shadows are actually okay. Like, it's nice kind of having that lower resolution on them, because you get that kind of fall off that we've spoken about before. So it kind of looks like you're getting a bit of global illumination going on, even though it's just a fake. But if you do want to improve the quality of those shadows, you can come to shadow resolution scale and kind of ramp that up. The next thing we want to do is really think about our cool and warm colours. So as we discussed in the presentation, it's good to use kind of a cool colour and a warm colour for your lighting. And the way we're going to do that here is by using our light being cast by the moon as a nice cool colour. So just going to tweak that, just set that to kind of off blue. Obviously you can take it really strong, but I just want it to be like a subtle kind of tint of this. Anything that's too much, so I can just bring that back down there. Right, so the next thing we want to do is think about our local lights. Now obviously this is something you should already have considered quite a lot, because you should have your animatic set up, so you know roughly where you'll want lights to have positioned. We're going to have lights kind of all the way around, intermittently positioned on this wall, and obviously have a light on the desk and maybe a light down here or something like that. So this kind of does depend on what you've set up for your cameras, for your animatic. Obviously there are functional lights, which are the lights on the walls in here, but we also have artistic lights where you might think, right, I'm going to add another light just to bring out areas or so on, or maybe just make a model so there's actually quite a strong light in place as well. So we're definitely going to have a light on this kind of desk here. So I'm just going to get him in place, and I'm going to bring my attenuation radius right down. Now when you're using real-time lights, it's movable. When you're using real-time lights like this, try and keep your attenuation as low as possible, because for each surface you can only have 4 movable lights. So you don't want to be having large attenuation like that, because you'll find that when you have more lights in the scene, you're going to end up disabling some movable lights. So just as a general rule of thumb, keep your attenuation as low as you can without affecting the quality kind of too much. So we're going to get a nice kind of warm light going on here. And there would be kind of a lamp model on there. I could just fake the lamp model with a box for now, but I think we're okay in this example just to leave it like that. And again, just set our strength to roughly what we want. And then what I'm going to do is, if that's going to be our desk light, probably sensible to name this as well, of course. And it's also good at this point, by the way, just to do a bit of scene management. Create folder, call it lighting, and you can start dropping all of your relevant kind of lighting and effect stuff in there. I'll probably even put my post-process in there too. So with these, as I mentioned before, we're going to just control this manually. Have these kind of uplights kind of positioned, because based off a lot of our reference, we have this kind of really nice frame that can go on the ceiling here. So I want to make sure that that is kind of highlighted in some of our shots. And what we're going to do on these on this kind of spot is use an IES texture just to get a more kind of interesting light cone. So you see you have light profiles down here with our spotlight. We could just pick one. I've included these in the project, and feel free to use these. There are plenty of others that you can kind of download for free if none of these are any use to you. And what this will do is just get us our more kind of interesting kind of light shape. And obviously it's worth picking one that's kind of similar to the kind of shape that you've made as well, of course. So matches the actual light fitting. So again, I'm changing this to be a kind of warmer colour. So we've got the blue from our kind of moon tint, and then we've got our warm light from all of our kind of lights inside the observatory. Now I'll ramp that up a little bit more as well. And then once you've got one of those kind of set up, you can obviously just kind of clone this and position these kind of where you want them to go. Okay, so what you might find when you've done some of this is that obviously areas like that up there aren't really getting any light. They're not getting much light from the skylight, and they're not getting any, obviously, kind of moonlight. So what you can do here is actually bring in things like an additional kind of spotlight. Bring your intensity right down. Turn off car shadows. And you can use these just to help fill the scene out a little bit more. So again, you can choose whether you want to have these as like kind of warm or cool. And what I'm kind of thinking here is I'll position like a couple of them around, because again, although it's not been modelled yet, what I'd like to do is I'm going to model a kind of complex frame around the ceiling, so I want to make sure that that is kind of nicely visible. So we'll have some shots, especially when the telescope is fully kind of up, just to show that kind of thing off. And so obviously an important thing to do here as well is make sure you control that kind of strength of your kind of fog effects. So you can do the same on these two, just control this volumetric scattering intensity. So just to show you can really kind of ramp that up if you ever needed to. But it is important on these fill lights to make sure that you have that set to 0. Like so. Okay, so that's like a really basic intro. If we just get this kind of, get your scene kind of lit up as best you can. The last thing I'm just going to quickly show you here is if we drop, say, light in here, set this to be orangey red, bring the attenuation right down. Like so. Bring it down even further. Obviously, a big advantage of this kind of thing is that we can animate all our lights kind of doing whatever we want. So that is the kind of big strength of this, of using real-time lighting, is that you guys can come up with some really kind of cool ways to kind of light your scenes and so on. Like so. And obviously you can also do things like animating the actual colour of this too. You can see that change in colour over time. Okay, so there's plenty more to cover in kind of real-time lighting. Next thing we need to really look at is getting reflection set up. So that's the next tutorial we'll do.